Sunday, the 15th of August, 2021. At a house on Neighbourne Street, Winmore, Leeds, West Yorkshire, England, the silence of a weekend morning was shattered by a horrifying discovery. The first person to find Eileen Barrett was her grown son, Joel Barrett. But as the scene inside the house unfolded, one detail immediately made everything seem abnormal. Eileen's husband, Mark Barrett, had completely disappeared. He wasn't at the scene, nor was he with the woman he had lived with for many years. At first glance, this was a normal family like any other. Many believed they had a stable marriage. However, behind the closed doors of that house lay a completely different reality. Years of control, manipulation, and silent pressure that few outsiders could recognize. Upon arriving at the scene, police determined it was not a natural death. A homicide investigation was immediately launched, while emergency search units began tracking down the husband who had disappeared just hours after his wife's death. What would drive a man to flee over 400 miles immediately after his wife was found dead? Was it the reaction of a panicked man, or the final step in a pre-planned scheme? But that was only the first step. Before becoming the subject of a homicide investigation, Eileen Barrett was simply an ordinary woman. She was 50 years old, a mother of two, and had spent most of her life caring for others rather than herself. Since 1996, Eileen had worked at St. James's Hospital as an NHS nurse. For many years, she was there for patients during the most difficult moments of their lives. To her colleagues, Eileen was dedicated, calm, and always ready to help. Those who worked with her remember a hardworking, humble woman who rarely let personal problems affect her work. Perhaps what made many people love Eileen wasn't her grand achievements, but the way she treated people every day. She didn't seek attention, nor did she try to be the center of any group. Eileen chose to live by kindness, responsibility, and the belief that every patient deserves the same care as family. After years of tireless work and a long marriage, what Eileen desired wasn't a luxurious life or major changes. She simply hoped to enter a more peaceful phase of her life, where she could live serenely after years of dedicating so much time to caring for others. But sometimes, the greatest tragedy befalls those who strive to bring peace to others. Behind the image of a dedicated nurse, a kind mother, and a hard-working woman, Eileen is still facing problems that few around her know about. And these secrets will gradually reveal the true picture of her seemingly ordinary marriage. From the outside, Mark Barrett doesn't seem like the kind of person who would arouse suspicion. He's Eileen's husband, the father of their two children, and the man with whom she's built a family life for many years. At work, Mark is an engineer. To those who know him or only interact with him socially, he appears to be a man with a stable life, a complete family, and nothing particularly unusual. He doesn't look aggressive. He doesn't project an image of someone prone to violence or crime. That's why, to many, the Barrett family seems like a normal family. The couple has lived together for many years, raising their children and maintaining a quiet life like so many other families in Leeds. But there's a reality that many domestic violence cases reveal. What outsiders see doesn't always reflect what's happening behind closed doors. A person can spend years cultivating the image of an exemplary husband, a responsible father, and an ordinary citizen, while those living with them experience a completely different story. That's precisely what makes Eileen Barrett's case so haunting. Because what neighbors, colleagues, and friends see is only the outward appearance. Behind those closed doors, a different reality silently exists, day after day, month after month, and year after year. But what others see is only the surface. If viewed individually, many might dismiss these actions as mere expressions of jealousy or excessive concern. But when put together, they form a pattern of control that Eileen lived with for years. The first sign was phone monitoring. Eileen's calls, texts, and how she communicated with others were no longer private. Every connection could be monitored, turning even ordinary conversations into a source of pressure. Next came the deletion of Eileen's contacts from her phone. As a person loses connection with friends and family, They also begin to lose the support network they could turn to when they need help. The control went even further when a tracking device was hidden in Eileen's handbag. This meant that every move she made could be tracked without her knowledge. Geographical distance no longer offered a sense of freedom when every place she went could be known to others beforehand. Even her workplace was no longer a safe space. According to the case file, Eileen was also monitored at work, blurring the lines between her personal and professional life. Meetings with friends were constantly disrupted by Mark's unexpected appearances. These weren't just coincidental appearances, but a message that Eileen was always being watched, no matter where she was or who she met. Over time, Eileen's social relationships became increasingly tightly controlled. When a person is gradually isolated from friends, family, and sources of support, it becomes increasingly difficult for them to find help or the confidence to leave their current situation. During the trial, the prosecution and the court determined that these acts constituted coercive control, a form of coercive control in which the perpetrator progressively dominates the victim's freedom, relationships, and life through surveillance, isolation, and manipulation, rather than solely through physical violence. Looking back at the entire sequence of actions, it's clear these weren't isolated incidents. They were links in a long-term, insidious control process that tightened its grip on Eileen's life day by day. But even those signs weren't the most dangerous thing for Eileen. What the investigators discovered next was even more alarming. After years of living in a marriage shrouded in control, Eileen Barrett finally made a momentous decision. She wanted to leave the marriage. Not to start a life of luxury or seek something extraordinary, but simply to live independently, to make her own decisions after years of enduring pressure. For Eileen, it was a choice to reclaim her peace. But for Mark Barrett, the decision held a completely different meaning. For years, all his controlling behavior had been aimed at one goal: keeping Eileen within his sphere of influence. When Eileen decided to leave, what Mark faced was not just the end of a marriage. It was also the moment he realized he was losing the control he had maintained for so long. Looking back at what happened before, from phone tracking and controlling relationships to workplace surveillance and the installation of tracking devices, it all led to a common point. These actions didn't occur randomly. They reflected Eileen's desire to control every aspect of her life. And when the controlled person decided to step out of that circle, everything began to change. The marriage ceased to be a relationship between two people and became a confrontation between a woman's yearning for freedom and the other's attempt to maintain control. According to the case file, the moment Eileen decided to leave the marriage became the most crucial turning point in the entire story. It was then that the simmering conflicts of many years reached a breaking point, initiating the chain of tragic events that followed. On the 15th of August, 2021, the house in Nibern Fold, Winmore, was no longer the home of a family as it usually was. Inside that very house, Eileen Barrett had been attacked and had no chance of survival. According to confirmed information in the case file, only Eileen and Mark Barrett were in the house that day. There were no signs of a stranger's presence. There was no evidence of forced entry. All lines of investigation quickly focused on what happened behind closed doors. Notably, after Eileen was attacked, Mark did not remain at the scene. Instead of calling for emergency services or waiting for authorities, he left the house. At approximately 6:31 p.m., police received a report and immediately arrived at the scene. After only an initial examination, investigators determined it was a homicide. All resources were mobilized to both examine the crime scene and urgently search for Mark Barrett, the husband who had disappeared immediately after the incident. For the investigators, a husband leaving the scene immediately after his wife's death was an undeniable detail. For Eileen's family, the question was simple: what really happened inside the house that day? The answer wouldn't lie in Mark Barrett's later explanations, but in the clues left at the scene and his escape, which spanned over 400 miles. But Mark didn't stay to explain what had happened. As investigators began to reconstruct what happened on the 15th of August 2021, a question quickly emerged. If this was just a sudden incident, why did Mark Barrett disappear so soon after? According to information confirmed in the case file, Mark did not call the police. He also did not stay at the scene to explain what happened to the wife who had lived with him for many years. Instead, Mark left Leeds immediately after the case. The journey is not a short one. From West Yorkshire, Mark continued to move towards Scotland, leaving behind his home in Winmore, and the investigation had just been launched. The total escape distance lasted more than 400 miles, enough for the police force to expand the search area beyond the area where the crime occurred. For investigators, behavior after a crime is always an important part of the investigation process. They not only review what happens at the scene, but also monitor every decision made afterward. A person staying to cooperate with the police would create another line of investigation. But in this case, Mark chose to leave. Each mile towards Scotland does not make the case any more confusing. On the contrary, it gave investigators even more reason to urgently search for the whereabouts of the husband who disappeared shortly after Eileen's death. But no matter how far the distance between Scotland and Leeds is, there is still one thing that Mark cannot leave behind: his own traces. And it is that escape journey that will lead the police to the end of their search. Police traced the first hours after Eileen Barrett's death. The first thing they discovered was also the hardest to miss. Mark had disappeared. He did not stay at the house in Winmore, did not proactively contact the authorities, and gave no explanation for what had just happened. Next, the police discovered Mark's image in the surveillance camera system at Leeds Station. These frames helped them determine he had left the city and begun his journey north. From here, each piece of the travel route was gradually pieced together, showing that Mark was heading towards Scotland, more than 400 miles from the scene. But the investigation doesn't just focus on the escape route. When digging deeper into the couple's married life, the police discovered that this was not a normal family that suddenly fell into tragedy. Behind the facade of stability lies a history of control spanning many years. Eileen's colleagues confirmed that Mark had appeared at the hospital to check on her. The workplace was supposed to be an independent and safe space for Eileen, but even there, she was not completely free from her husband's supervision. This detail is consistent with what has been discovered before: the tracking of her phone, deletion of contacts, hiding of location devices, and unexpected appearances in her private meetings. Eileen's family also confirmed that she wanted to end the marriage. She did not suddenly disappear from Mark's life. She made a clear decision to leave and live independently. And that decision puts all previous controlling behavior in a much more worrying context. At this point, the puzzle pieces begin to connect with each other. A wife wants to leave the marriage, a husband who controlled her for many years. An attack occurred in a house with no signs of strangers. And soon after, Mark left Leeds, appeared at the train station, and continued his journey towards Scotland. The police are no longer just looking for a missing husband. They're searching for the only person who was with Eileen before she died, and all the newly discovered clues are leading in the same direction. The first blow came from the autopsy results. Eileen Barrett died after being attacked with a hammer and strangled. This conclusion alone shows that it was neither an accident nor a natural death. She was directly attacked in her own home. The crucial point is not the description of each injury, but what the autopsy results proved. The perpetrator used more than one form of violence. The attack was proactive, overwhelming, and left Eileen with no chance to defend herself. When that is combined with Mark leaving the scene without reporting to the police, the possibility of an innocent explanation becomes even more difficult to sustain. The second blow is not forensic evidence in the traditional sense. It is the history of coercive control that had lasted throughout the marriage. Each individual detail, tracing her phone, deleting contacts, hiding a tracking device in her handbag, checking her workplace, and interfering with her social relationships, formed a consistent pattern of behavior. Why is that pattern important? Because a case isn't just about what happens in the final minutes. Sometimes, the motive has been brewing for years. When Eileen decided to end the marriage and live independently, Mark faced what his entire control system was built to prevent: losing control over her. The third blow came from CCTV. The camera recorded Mark appearing at Leeds station after leaving their house in Winmore. From there, police traced his movements towards Scotland. The video data didn't explain Mark's actions. It only recorded exactly what he did: leaving Leeds, abandoning the scene, and traveling over 400 miles north. The autopsy concluded that Eileen had been assaulted. Forcing history provides context and motivation. CCTV reconstructs the escape after the crime. 3 different layers of evidence, but when placed side by side, they lead to the same conclusion. And when science, behavior, and imagery all tell the same story, the room for an innocent explanation is almost gone. At Bradford Crown Court, the story of Eileen Barrett's death was finally presented to a jury. On one side was the prosecution, tasked with proving that this was not a momentary loss of control, much less a case of diminished responsibility. On the other side, the defense attorney attempted to explain Mark Barrett's actions as a sign that he was not fully in control of his actions at the time of the crime. But the trial wasn't just about the final few minutes in the Winmore home. The prosecution presented the jury with a look at the entire context of the marriage: years of stalking, phone interference, deleting contacts, hiding a tracking device in her handbag, presence at her workplace, and control over Eileen's social relationships. These actions revealed a pattern of prolonged coercion, not a sudden conflict that arose on the day of the crime. And when Eileen decided to end the marriage, Mark faced something he couldn't accept. She was about to escape his control. The prosecution also highlighted the post-crime conduct. Mark didn't call the police. He didn't stay at the scene. He left Leeds, appeared on CCTV at the train station, and continued on for over 400 miles towards Scotland. This escape became a crucial part of the assessment of the defendant's state of mind and responsibility. The defense attorney argued for diminished responsibility, but the jury had to consider that explanation in relation to the entire sequence of actions before, during, and after the crime. A long history of control, a wife wanting to leave, an attack in the home, and a husband immediately fleeing the scene. After considering the evidence and hearing arguments from both sides, the jury rejected the argument for diminished responsibility. Mark Barrett was found guilty of murder. The court sentenced her to life imprisonment, with a minimum term of 21 years before she could be considered for parole. That sentence couldn't bring Eileen back, but it confirmed what the case had shown from beginning to end. This wasn't an inexplicable tragedy. It was the culmination of a prolonged period of control, reaching its most brutal point when the victim decided to reclaim her life. In the end, what remains of this case is not the name of the perpetrator, but the void that Eileen Barrett leaves in the lives of those who loved her. Eileen's 2 children are the ones who bear the heaviest consequences. In a single day, they lost the mother who had raised them for many years, and also lost their father in a way no one would have wished for. No sentence can restore their broken home, nor can it erase the memory of the day their family life was forever torn apart. At St. James's Hospital, colleagues also lost a nurse who had dedicated nearly a quarter of a century to the NHS. They remember Eileen not only for her expertise and dedication to her work, but also for her kindness, composure, and her spirit of always putting patients before herself. For many, her passing is not just the loss of a colleague, but the loss of a person who quietly brought comfort to countless other families. For Eileen's family, the pain didn't end when the trial concluded. They had to learn to live with the loss year after year, while preserving the memory of a gentle, hardworking woman who always longed for a peaceful life. The Eileen Barrett case also serves as a prime example of how coercive control can escalate into deadly violence if not identified and prevented in time. Signs such as phone monitoring, isolating the victim from friends and family, controlling relationships, surveillance at work, or depriving them of their autonomy are not expressions of love. They are warning signs of a dangerous relationship. Perhaps the greatest lesson from this case lies not in the sentence for the perpetrator, but in the warning to all of us. Domestic violence doesn't always begin with visible wounds. Sometimes it begins with control disguised as concern. And if those signs had been recognized earlier, listened to more seriously, and intervened in a more timely manner, Perhaps a tragedy, like Eileen Barrett's, might not have happened. There are people who spend years building the image of a normal husband, a responsible father, and a seemingly happy family in everyone's eyes. But sometimes, just the moment control is about to slip away, that shell can completely crumble, revealing an essence that no family photo or kind words can hide. Eileen Barrett's profile reminds us that domestic violence rarely begins with an extreme act. It often starts with very small signs: a controlled call, a broken relationship, a hidden tracking device, or a person's freedom gradually shrinking day by day. When these signs are overlooked or disguised as love, they can silently develop into a cycle of control that becomes increasingly difficult for the victim to escape. And perhaps the biggest lesson this case leaves behind is, don't wait until violence appears to call it violence. Because sometimes, tragedy doesn't start with the first blow, but with small acts of control that have been ignored for too long. What do you think was the biggest warning sign in this case? Share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more true crime documentaries.